All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome back to everybody. We are on to our next agenda item, talking about a very important topic for our state, which is carbon capture. Certainly a lot, I think, on everybody's mind. You know, everybody or certain elements within this country want to ensure that we have a carbon-free future, but there's also, I think, an increasing recognition that just doesn't appear out of thin air. Sometimes, quite literally, there has to be a reliable, dispatchable source of energy with our energy grid, and carbon capture definitely represents an important step forward in achieving that goal. So that being said, we do have representatives from our federal delegation, and I believe Senator Barrasso's staff is up first, but I also believe that our federal staff is coordinated. So I just refer to them as far as who wants to go first, and please just introduce yourself and take it from there.
Thank you all. Appreciate you all having us here today to talk about these issues. My name is David Bridges. I serve as tax counsel to Senator John Barrasso. With me today, Kate Farr serves as counsel on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Esther Wagner, I believe, will be here working for Congresswoman Liz Cheney, and then as well Hans Hunt with Senator Cynthia Lummis. So we're going to discuss these carbon capture issues today, and just kind of a brief rundown of, I think, how we're going to approach this. I'll first touch on the tax front and some developments in that space. Then Kate will provide an update on DOE and the Senate Energy Committee activities. I believe Esther will discuss provisions in the recently passed or signed into law, I should say, infrastructure package. And then Hans will touch on updates in the carbon management and agriculture space. So obviously I should definitely start as well with the usual disclaimer. I'm speaking on my own behalf and not necessarily for Senator Barrasso himself. So on the tax front here in DC, for the past 6 months, we've basically primarily been focused on the president's tax and spending plan. This legislation did pass the House on November 19th, but it's not yet received a vote here in the Senate. It does currently include, though, an extension of Section 45Q all the way through 2031, as well as a number of modifications to that credit. And these modifications would be applicable to projects that start after December 31st, 2021. But obviously that is dependent on, final passage of a bill on what that actually look like. So in the current text of this bill, like I said, it extends the credit through 2031. And it also permits taxpayers to elect to receive the payment, to receive a payment, I should say, in lieu of the credit. So this is direct pay, basically. Projects would not need to find a tax equity investor and could instead basically receive a check from the Treasury Department. The provision also provides, it kind of changes the credit base structure for 45Q. It provides a base credit of $17 per metric ton for storage, but it provides a bonus rate of 85 for storage, and then a base rate of 12 for utilization and a bonus rate of $60 per metric ton for utilization. And then for direct air capture, it increases these values even higher to a bonus rate of 180 for direct air capture that is stored, and then a bonus rate of 130 per metric ton for direct air capture facilities that are utilized. So in order to claim these bonus rate values as opposed to base levels, the taxpayer would have to meet two different requirements. The first one is a prevailing wage requirement, both during construction, but then also during the 12 years that facility receives the credit for any kind of repair work and things like that throughout that time. And then the taxpayer would also have to meet the certain apprenticeship requirements during the construction of the project. So these are definitely, I would say, union priorities, but those are two of the requirements for receiving the full value of the credit in this bill. Additionally, this bill does lower the capture thresholds in order to qualify for the credit. So the new thresholds would be under this bill would be 1,000 metric tons for direct air capture facilities, 18,750 metric tons, and 75% of the facility's carbon emissions for a generation facility, so power plants, and then 12,500 metric tons for any other facility, such as industrials and things like that. Kind of along those lines of the thresholds, earlier this year, Senator Brasso, along with Senator Lujan from New Mexico, introduced the Catch Act. This bill basically completely eliminates any threshold requirements for capture in order to qualify for the facility. So, it allows for, I think, more scalable projects, and definitely opens up the credit to, I think, a lot more utilization by taxpayers. In addition, the Catch Act also increases the credit values to $85 per metric ton for storage and $60 per metric ton for utilization. So obviously, this is very similar to some of the provisions in the Democrats' current bill, but obviously there are a few key differences there. While the bonus rates in the Democrats' bill are similar, or are the same, I should say, as the Catch Act. Obviously, the Catch Act does not have any kind of base rate plus bonus rate kind of issue there, and any taxpayer who qualifies for the credit would get the full credit value. And then also with the elimination of the thresholds in the Catch Act, like I said, that I think opens up the credit to a lot more use and benefit to more taxpayers. And then also it doesn't have the issue of the 75% of the full facilities emissions. Some facilities have multiple units that they would want to put carbon capture equipment on, and a lot of facilities do that one by one. So requiring a generating facility to capture 3/4 of all their emissions up front would be cost prohibitive, I think, to certain facilities to do that, because they tend to do it over a period of time as opposed to all at once. So if you only do one unit as opposed to all 3 units, you don't hit that threshold. So that could cause, I think that can cause some issues, but there have been discussions, I think, ongoing on the Democrat side at the very least, to see if they could correct some of those issues. Obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have, but now I think I'll turn the microphone over to Kate to talk about DOE and the Energy Committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bridges. Looks like we have a question from our co-chair.
David, a quick question on those bills. Can you give us the bill numbers, or send a copy of the draft to, say, John Brody, and he can disseminate it? Because those are in line with what some of the things Wyoming is considering doing. And I think we need to coordinate with what our delegation in Washington is doing also, not step on toes here. So if we could do that, that'd be great.
Of course. Yeah, the Catch Act is S2230, but I will send a copy along to John after this meeting.
Thank you.
Any further questions at this juncture? Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Farr, you're up next.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for inviting us to join you today. Really appreciate the opportunity. And again, to follow up on the disclaimer, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not necessarily Senator Barrasso or the Senate Energy Committee. So as David had mentioned, I'll be providing an overview and update on the Department of Energy and its various programs and efforts in the carbon capture space over the past year. Senator Barrasso is the ranking member of the Senate Energy Committee. We have oversight of the Department of Energy and the Office of Fossil Energy, which handles all of the various carbon capture programs. The Office of Fossil Energy has undergone some pretty significant changes under the new administration. It's been renamed to the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. The Secretary has also revised the mission statement of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management to focus more on the carbon management side of things, the downstream effects of our use of the various fossil fuels. In addition to the new mission statement, they have decided to eliminate the Office of Coal and the Office of Oil and Natural Gas as sub-offices under the Office of Fossil Energy. They have now housed all of these programs in the Office of Carbon Management. So those programs will not go away. The research is still ongoing. Those funding opportunities will now flow through just the Office of Carbon Management rather than the individual Office of Coal and Office of Oil and Natural Gas. The department has also chosen to stand up a new Office of Environmental Justice within fossil energy as well. So all of this is public. I'm happy to provide some of the slides and charts showing the reorganization. But as part of our role as on the committee, we're going to be taking a very, very close look, making sure that all of the programs that are authorized, that are currently under execution, are continued fully with a focus on carbon capture from power plants, industrial sources, direct air capture, the entire I guess life of in the carbon capture space. So that'll be an ongoing priority for us over the next few years here. So in addition, I've also been working, Senator Barrasso has been working on a pore space bill. This is outside of the scope of the Office of Fossil Energy here. This has more to do with BLM lands, but it would provide a mechanism to clear title to federal pore space. This was an issue that you all, the Wyoming legislature, tackled years ago, and several other states have pore space clarification bills. So we are seeking to do that at the federal level. I've been working very closely with Professor Tara Rigetti at UW Law and some other professors to put together a good and robust bill. So we're sharing that with some of our Democratic colleagues, and we look forward to that being a good bipartisan effort in the next year here. So we'll continue to perform our oversight, make sure that all of these funding opportunities and programs continue to be executed in light of DOE's new reorganized Office of Fossil Energy. And yeah, I welcome any questions and look forward to continuing the conversation on this.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Kate, it's good to see you again. Hey, with the pore space bill, is it modeled after Wyoming's, but for BLM land or federal land, or a little bit more detail, if you would, please?
Certainly, yes, and happy to send over the current draft. The purpose of the bill, as you all tackle this issue, is to really clear title to that pore space. As you all might be aware, there's no clear definitive owner of pore space on federal lands. The law never contemplated it, so at the federal level at least. So what the bill seeks to do is to clarify that the pore space management runs with the surface. This is consistent with how Wyoming does it, Montana, Texas, state law, case law. So in areas of split estate, where the surface is private, the pore space would be managed according to the law governing the surface estate. So it would be pursuant to state law. This, we see as consistent. It's consistent with, again, state and case law. So it will hopefully provide some of those project proponents looking to permanently store on federal land with that level of certainty. As you all know, you wouldn't buy a house or a car or sign an oil and gas lease without having clear title to it. And so that is what this bill seeks to do, to provide that clarification. as you all know, and as we're discussing today, there are a lot of moving parts to the carbon capture problem and question and future. And so we see this as a pretty important piece of the puzzle. It just takes away one of those big questions for our project proponents. So yeah, we're excited about it and going to continue to work on that. So thank you.
Any further questions? Yeah, well, I have one on relating to the reorganization efforts you mentioned within the Department of Energy. I guess similar to my co-chairman's question, just maybe a little bit more detail on what you expect the effects of that reorganization to be, how that might affect this topic in particular, carbon capture, but maybe just more in general. Do you know what, is there an intention specifically or specific policy goal behind this reorganization?
Yeah, so every new administration, new secretary, comes in with different priorities. And this administration, Secretary Granholm, they have been clear that focusing on more of the carbon management side of fossil energy is one of their priorities. They have the authority. Every new administration has the authority to a prerogative to organize the administration as they see fit. So we are not, completely surprised that there are these revisions and a revised mission statement and the reorganized offices, but they are still completely required to follow Congress's direction in terms of the various programs that Congress has enacted. So, yes, a program might be now housed under the Office of Carbon Management, whereas before it might have been under oil and gas or coal. But it still has to be carried out and executed. So we'll be paying very diligent attention to that to make sure that everything is up and running. Congress still has to fund a lot of this too through our regular appropriations cycle, which has been delayed this year, just due to the many various bills going through and general politics, I'd say. But we are very diligent about that and making sure that everything that Congress has directed the department to do, they are doing. I should mention too, we have a great chairman of the committee, and Chairman Manchin. He is a fellow coal state senator. He gets it. He understands and fully supports carbon capture, carbon management. Earlier this year, one of our very first hearings was on carbon utilization. We had a couple folks from Wyoming come out. It was fantastic. But this is really an area of great bipartisanship and something that we can continue to do. So along with Chairman Manchin's staff, we've been diligent in maintaining and that oversight to make sure that programs that are important to our bosses are executed.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Committee, any further questions from this far? Okay, seeing none at this time, we'll see if we come back to you. We'll, I think, pivot to in-person here. We have Esther Wagner with Representative Cheney's office. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you said, I'm Esther Wagner, Senior Policy Advisor for Energy and Lands for Representative Cheney. I'm going to provide an update on the numerous provisions in the Infrastructure Act, which are aimed at scaling carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies towards commercialization. Most of these come from the SCALE Act, which the Congresswoman was an original co-sponsor on when it was introduced in the House earlier this year. These provisions in the Act provide the policy support needed to help build out large-scale CO2 transport systems and geologic storage, up to and including large regional CO2 storage hubs with pipelines. And with all the work, of course, that the state has done to advance CCUS, like the Wyoming Pipeline Corridor Initiative, permitting primacy for CO2 storage wells, storage site research, legislation, the state is certainly poised to take advantage of the opportunities for the significant funding that are provided in the Act, which is about $12.1 billion. The incentive provided through the reform and expansion of 45Q that was finalized earlier this year, that will certainly also help. The Infrastructure Act, just to mention some other things, it also includes significant funding for hydrogen-related research and development, and allows for hydrogen produced by fossil fuels to qualify for funding as well. It appropriates funding for the development of critical minerals and rare earth elements, as well as nuclear. So there are some, good items in there for Wyoming. So specifics related to CCUS in the Infrastructure Act. Sorry I'm going to have to read all these because it's long, and but I'll get there. Anyway, funding for carbon capture large-scale pilot projects in the amount of $937 million over 4 years. These projects are defined as those that represent the scale of technology development beyond laboratory development and bench scale testing, but those that are not yet advanced to the point of being tested under real operational conditions as commercial scale. They're mainly to gain operational data needed to understand the technical and performance risks of the technology before applying it at commercial scale. The Act also appropriates funding for carbon capture demonstration projects in the amount of $2.5 billion over 5 years. Actually 4 years, excuse me. These projects would be designed to further the development, deployment, and commercialization of technologies to capture and sequester CO2 emissions from new and existing coal and natural gas electric generation facilities, and also industrial facilities. The Act also appropriates funding for carbon storage validation and testing in the amount of $2.5 billion over 5 years, building upon the current Carbon Safe program. This would implement a large-scale carbon storage commercialization program to provide funding for the development of new or expanded commercial large-scale carbon sequestration projects and the associated CO2 transport infrastructure. Priority will be given to projects with substantial CO2 storage capacity, or those that will store CO2 from multiple carbon capture facilities. There's also funding appropriated for the establishment of a CO2 Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act program at DOE in the amount of $2.1 billion over 5 years. This program actually would provide eligible projects with the federal credit instruments, loans, or grants, or a combination of to finance CO2 transportation infrastructure and associated equipment, including pipeline, shipping, and rail to transport the captured CO2. The Infrastructure Act also appropriates funding for EPA for the increased permitting activities that are associated with Class 6 CO2 storage well. And it also includes grants for states like Wyoming that have Class 6 permitting primacy. The appropriated funds for EPA are $5 million each year for 5 years, and there's a total of $50 million for state grants over a period of 5 years. And right now, I think that's just Wyoming and North Dakota, from my understanding. The legislation amends the carbon capture technology program to add a front-end engineering and design program for CO2 transport infrastructure, and appropriates additional funds for the purpose, for that purpose, in the amount of $100 million over 5 years. And just a couple more here. It establishes a CO2 utilization program to provide funding to entities that procure and issue commercial or industrial products that are that use or are derived actually from anthropogenic carbon oxides. The appropriation for this program is approximately $310 million over 5 years. It directs DOE to establish a program to provide funding for projects that would contribute to the development of 4 regional direct air capture hubs Each hub must have the capacity to capture and sequester and or utilize at least 1 million metric tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. Each eligible project must be located in a region with either existing carbon-intensive fuel production or carbon-intensive fuel production that has retired or closed in the preceding 10 years. At least 2 of the hubs must be located in economically distressed regions of the U.S. with high levels of coal, oil, and natural gas resources. And the total appropriation for that program is $3.5 billion over 5 years. And lastly, the Act appropriates funds for pre-commercial and commercial direct air capture technology prize competitions, specifically for the fiscal year 2022. The pre-commercial technology competition prize is for $15 million, and eligible projects must meet minimum performance standards and levels for the capture of CO2. The commercial technology competition prize is for $100 million, and awards will go to qualified direct air capture facilities for metric tons of qualified CO2 captured and verified at the point of disposal, injection, or utilization. So that's the list of the CCUS items in the Infrastructure Act. Lastly, I'd just like to mention a couple of carbon capture bills that the Congresswoman has co-sponsored this year. The Carbon Capture Modernization Act. This would reform the Section 48A tax credit to relax the efficiency requirements for new and retrofit projects if they include carbon capture and sequestration, making it easier for new and retrofit projects to include carbon management systems. This is still a standalone bill in the House, most likely because it focuses, we're not expecting it to go anywhere this Congress, most likely because it focuses on 48A and most of the focus is on 45Q at this time. Next is the CCUS Innovation Act that clarifies and emphasizes the types of CCUS projects that are eligible for DOE's loan guarantee program. And expands it to include CCUS infrastructure, direct air capture, pre and post combustion capture, and different methods of storage. This bill has been included as part of the Energy and Commerce Republicans package, Securing Cleaner American Energy. It's aimed at spurring the development and deployment of clean energy infrastructure without the pie in the sky mandates, regulations, and federal government spending that we're seeing from the current administration. While the package will mostly not go anywhere this time, there is hope that it'll move next Congress. So she also co-sponsored the House version of the Catch Act that David and Senator Barrasso's office just mentioned earlier. So with that concludes my update. Be happy to answer questions or just Hans can pass it on to Hans and he can cover for Senator Lummis.
Okay, all right, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 questions. One, your notes on all the various programs and the available money. Can you share those with us so that we have an idea of what's there, what's available?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, yes, I'd be happy to do that.
And a follow-up to that, listening to what you had to say, and we had this discussion during the lunch break, it almost looks like that was written out of Wyoming's playbook, what is in there. So how much benefit will all of that be to, do you think, I'm asking for an opinion, to the state? I mean, if we get even some of that grant money.
Yeah, Senator Moner, Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart. I think that, Wyoming has a good opportunity to get a lot of these funds. Like you said, we're down the road on a lot of these items. You have the Wyoming Energy Authority and the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources to help with, any of the grant applications, those types of things. Just need to be sure to just keep an eye out for the funding opportunity announcements that come out of DOE. Make sure that they, keep in contact with DOE to make sure that they are crafted in a way that Wyoming can benefit from them.
We'll follow from based off that and feel free to speculate as much as you want, but how much competition do you think there would be nationwide for these grants? Is Wyoming going to, imagine maybe West Virginia is in the running too, but who knows? There's just a little bit more discussion as to how we lay nationally.
Mr. Chairman, I can't speculate on that. I don't know the answer to that. Sorry. But I mean, in my opinion, I think we're sitting good.
Any questions, committee? Okay, thank you. Appreciate all that's quite the laundry list of things that Representative Cheney's been working on, our delegation's been working on to ensure that this technology moves forward. So thanks for all your work, and I look forward to your continued effort. So, that being said, we have a familiar face here, a former representative, Hans Hunt, is joining us on Zoom, not in person as we're used to, but we'll take the Zoom. So, Mr. Hunt, welcome to our select committee. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
We hear you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. It's good to see you guys. Sorry I can't be there in person, but good to see your faces again. I'll be touching a little bit on the agricultural side of this issue. And earlier this year, Senator Lummis co-sponsored a bill brought forward by Senator Mike Braun of Indiana called the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And in a nutshell, what the bill does is that it authorizes the Secretary of Agriculture to develop a program which would reduce the barriers of entry for farmers, ranchers, and for private forest landowners to voluntarily participate in carbon sequestration programs. And so, and then it would also allow provide assistance for third-party verifiers to participate as well, who would then be the verifiers for those landowners in these voluntary programs. And so basically, it's similar to NRCS, and in a way, it's an extension of the current NRCS programs and other conservation efforts that are currently in place. And so it allows farmers and ranchers to get into these voluntary environmental credit markets, which I'm sure everybody's has heard of and may be familiar with. And it allows them to get into those markets and then use those credits, which can be bought or sold on that market. And some of the covered activities that would be included are any activity that has any current and future activities that prevent, reduce, or mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon, including, and this is a somewhat lengthy list, so I won't list all of them off the top, but happy to send this to you later. But land or soil carbon sequestration, emissions reductions derived from fuel choice or reduced fuel use, livestock emissions reductions through changing feed or feed additives, and manure management practices, reforestation, forest management, including improving harvesting practices and thinning diseased trees, and restoration of wetlands or grasslands and grassland management. And like I say, the list goes on, but Mr. Chairman, happy to provide that to you in an email. So as that's sort of the end of it for the farmers and ranchers who might be interested in participating. And then the requirements that it would put on the third-party verifying entities would say that they have to perform and demonstrate expertise in best management practices for agricultural and forest activities, which prevent, reduce, or mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. This would, if this bill were to pass, it kicks it off with a $4.1 million appropriation, which comes out of the any unobligated funding from the American Rescue Plan, and then furthermore provides it $1 million annually between 2022 and 2026. This bill has 54 co-sponsors on the Senate side, and as I said, including Senator Lummis, and it passed the Senate in June, and then so far it has stalled out there. So we'll see if it gets taken up in the House in the next year. But Mr. Chairman, that is that effort in a nutshell. And so I don't have as much to add as Kate or David as far as any background, because I'm still trying to get my feet under me a little bit. But that is just one example of the efforts being discussed at our federal level in trying to voluntarily bring the agricultural industry into the carbon sequestration discussion and kickstart the interest from farmers and ranchers. So happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Hans? Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate the ag perspective, as you may already know. And thinking back to was about a year or two ago when we were chairman of the Joint Ag Committee, and we looked at what we could do at the state level to assist these efforts as well. And so I guess same question to you, sir, is what should the Wyoming legislature be thinking about? Potentially in anticipation of either this bill passing or some similar provisions coming down the pipe from the federal government.
Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. I'm not sure that I've fully fleshed that out. I think that though it's a good thing for your committee and for the Agriculture Committee to keep an eye on. And I think that if hypothetically, if this bill would pass, I think that it would be good to sit down with the state ag department and possibly DEQ and start seeing what sort of resources would be available at the state level from either of those departments to possibly, put together some similar state equivalent if the funding is available, or to begin, working through other legislatures and communicating back and forth with the federal level for future funding that to see if the state could, if it's interested, if the state could, carry the water once this is implemented and on the ground. And so I'm reviewing this bill, Mr. Chairman. There's not a whole lot of detail that would suggest as to how this would be implemented beyond it says, that the secretary can promulgate rules. So I can't speak to any further detail beyond that. But I think that this is, whether we like it or not, this is sort of the direction of the future. And, it's obviously always good to start at the voluntary level, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on and see how this, whether it's this legislation or something similar in the future, see how that is implemented and is embraced by farmers and ranchers.
Okay, well, thanks. Appreciate the input. Committee, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just I think your co-chairman Burkhardt had on a previous piece of legislation wanted the number on that, and I'll happily send this along in an email as well. But just for your reference right now, this is S 1251. So just in case anybody's interested in reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we'll take a look at, and it seems to me honestly, there's if it's something we decide to pursue as a state, it's almost more of a we have to sell the idea to our fellow farmers and ranchers. I just kind of remember the reception we got from some of the discussion on the Ag Committee a couple of years ago, and it might be an idea that takes some warming up to, I think, in our neck of the woods, but something that could be an option for some producers, and we shouldn't just dismiss it out of hand. So, but we'll try to avoid too many conversations with professors from, I think it was UC Davis, kind of rubbed some people the wrong way, if I remember correctly, one of our meetings. But so anyways, so yeah, appreciate your work, Representative Hunt, and yeah, good to see you again, if only over Zoom, and look forward to seeing you back here at some point whenever you get a chance. So any questions before we sign off here? Okay, well, appreciate all of you taking the time. I know you're very busy and appreciate all your work on behalf of this state and our country to pursue this very important technology and to further develop and make sure it becomes implemented as we seek to lower our carbon footprint, but also have a reliable energy grid. Okay, so that gets us through the scheduled part of our testimony. Just open up to any public comment from anybody who might be willing on this issue. We do have some folks, looks like in the back room, that did present to the Corporations Committee yesterday if they want. No pressure one way or the other, but we're ready for you if you want. I know that we got a good presentation, or some McGuire and I did, but I think it's worth repeating here, and invite them to come on down since they're in the neighborhood anyways. So it's representatives from Glenrock Energy looking. I think we heard the policy side there. These are the folks that are actually looking to get this done on the ground here in Wyoming. And so welcome. Good to see you again, gentlemen. Feel free to state your name for the record. And I believe we might, Heather, even have a presentation from the yesterday. It should be in your email box too, if you want to follow along. But the floor is yours. And if you want that presentation up, we can probably try and get that.
Thank you, Chairman Boner, and esteemed representatives and legislators. We made a presentation yesterday to the Corporations Committee at the request of the co-chairman that related to commercial proposals that have been provided to Governor Gordon and to the investor-owned utility here in the state of Wyoming. That's the largest. We represent a sponsor of those projects that are very committed to making a implementation occur in Wyoming. And I'll make hopefully something light of the problem that I see. And that is, we've talked about it for 20 years. In fact, we were at a lunch today with Senator Scott, and he reminded me that the carbon capture, sequestration, and storage theme has been talked about by the Wyoming legislators for 20 years, and that I shouldn't be so cheeky to think that it was an idea that Glenrock brought along in 2016. So with that, I'll say I'm Terry Manning. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Glenrock, and sitting to my right, your left, would be my Chief Financial Officer, Matthew Cooney. Glenrock Energy is based in Wyoming. In fact, we have an office here in Casper. We run an oil field out by Glenrock, but we're a carbon management company that's been very interested in extending the glide path of coal through environmental stewardship that substantiates what we have already as a resource base in Wyoming, and thereby proliferates jobs and diversifies the industrial base of the state. And I'll turn this over to Matthew Cooney. If you have any questions after he's finished a brief statement, please do not hesitate to ask us the hard questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll quickly go through our presentation from yesterday, which I see is on the screen. On page 1, we provide some background on our company, Glenrock Energy. As Terry mentioned, we're Casper-based. We're a Wyoming company sponsoring Wyoming projects, developing carbon capture projects in Wyoming. We also own and operate the Muddy Glenrock oil fields, which are the largest contiguous block of state acreage in Wyoming, with over 150 million barrels of remaining producible oil. Glenrock's proposed carbon capture project at the Dave Johnston Power Plant, which is located less than 6 miles from those fields, will provide a logical CO2 source, which will facilitate the production of a substantial number of those barrels. Development of that resource will provide substantial royalty and production tax revenue to Wyoming. Since 2008, we have been engaged with stakeholders in Wyoming regarding the benefits of carbon capture, which are provided on the next slide. We call these the big 6. I won't go through each one, but I'll summarize by saying that carbon capture will ensure electric grid reliability by maintaining coal field units and other existing critical infrastructure, preserve and create well-paying jobs today and for the future generations, avoid economic and social consequences of abandoning fossil energy facilities, provide a sustainable long-term market for Wyoming coal. Carbon capture is not just about saving 1 or 2 coal-fired units in Wyoming. Rather, it's also about providing know-how that Wyoming can export to other states that currently consume Wyoming coal. And finally, carbon capture will diversify the Wyoming economy by fostering new businesses, new industries that need reliable, low-cost, low-carbon energy. Examples include hydrogen, rare earth elements, blockchain, digital infrastructure, and the related services and equipment manufacturing. Next slide describes stakeholder benefits, which are specific to the projects proposed and sponsored by Glenrock Energy. As proposed, these carbon capture projects will not result in higher electricity prices. The capital costs of installing carbon capture equipment will be borne by independent developers, such as our company. Specifically, Glenrock is not seeking state funding for the construction of our projects. Rather, the costs of carbon capture, this includes the incremental energy requirements, other operating expenses, and the capital costs will be offset by tax credits and revenue from the sale of carbon dioxide. Also, Glenrock's proposed projects will enhance environmental stewardship by capturing and reducing carbon emissions by up to 4 million tons per year. And that is relative to the integrated resource plan presented by a major utility here in Wyoming. Next slide describes why Wyoming is uniquely positioned to lead in carbon capture implementation. These reasons include the low cost electricity generating stations in our state, ideal conditions for storing captured carbon dioxide due to the state's geology, which consists of multiple stacked reservoirs suitable for deep saline sequestration and low carbon oil production, emissions controls already in place at several units, and the ability to deploy proven carbon capture technology. In the case of our company, we're working with the leading provider of post-combustion carbon capture technology, and that company is prepared to provide a performance guarantee of their product. Following slide provides an overview of one of the 2 projects that Glenrock is proposing and sponsoring. It's post-combustion carbon capture at the Dave Johnston Generation Facility. Dave Johnston is a low-cost electricity provider. The carbon capture facility will again utilize commercially proven technology to remove 95% or more of the carbon dioxide from the exhaust stream. That carbon dioxide will be securely stored at the Muddy Glenrock fields, which Glenrock operates.
You might ask if they have any questions on this schematic before you move on.
Sure. That carbon dioxide will be stored at the Muddy Glenrock fields, which I mentioned before, which are located less than 6 miles away, and have reservoirs that are suitable both for deep saline sequestration and low carbon oil production. Carbon dioxide may also be sold to other oil producers in the Powder River Basin. Before I move off of this slide, does the committee have any questions specific to Dave Johnston or anything I've talked about so far?
Any questions, Craig? All right. Yeah, we'll keep on.
Okay, moving along. The following slide describes the second project which Glenrock is sponsoring and proposing. It's referred to as New Naughton. This project will convert coal from the Kemmer mine, which currently supplies the existing Naughton generating station, into multiple forms of carbon-free energy. This includes electricity, hydrogen, and ammonia. Ammonia being produced by combining hydrogen with nitrogen. And there are numerous advantages to ammonia production, including the fact that ammonia can be used as a carbon-free fuel. New Naughton fits very well with other proposed projects in southwestern Wyoming that will advance the energy transition. So on the following slide, I'll conclude by saying that carbon capture will provide numerous benefits for Wyoming. Well-paying jobs, electric grid reliability, economic diversification, and economic stewardship. Wyoming has great carbon capture candidates. including Dave Johnston and New Naughton. And these projects are important steps in a statewide program, and that we're committed to advancing carbon capture in Wyoming. I'd like to thank the committee, Chairman, for your attention today. Thank actually the legislature for all their efforts to date to advance carbon capture in Wyoming. And with that, open up for any further questions or comments that you may have. Thank you.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So about 10 years ago, there was some strong interest in underground coal gasification here in the state of Wyoming. And noticing that you are involved in that, my question is your interest include any kind of underground coal gasification?
Our project relates specifically to the Kemmerer coal mine, which is an above ground mine.
If I may address the committee chairman, Representative McGuire, that technology still is being studied by many schools around the country, and a lot of private interest is still in place for in situ subsurface combustion of not only coal, but other elements that reside in the subsurface. The problem has constantly been the control of the combustion cycle in the ground and how you do that efficiently and make sure that an effective control of that mechanism can be handled by the surface. So it's a great idea once your reservoir or your particular resource is spent to the point where your access by surface or underground mining is done, but it really does create some certain issues regarding control of and management of the combustion process in the subsurface.
Okay, well, I'll ask one. I think I asked yesterday, how do you see this technology interacting with things like, obviously, I'm just thinking about nuclear right now. How does that work? How do you see that working moving forward?
Great question. Thank you, Chairman Boner. Gentlemen, really interesting question, because we have a meeting out in Kemmerer on Monday to address that for the Lincoln County folks, for the Kemmerer mine and for the town of Kemmerer. Their question to us 8 weeks ago, when we first really brought it to their attention, we submitted the proposal that you saw Matthew review on the slide on September the 16th to the governor and to the Pacific Corps folks in Salt Lake City under the request for expression of interest. At the time, the Lincoln County folks thought it was untimely for them to engage serious discussions of another utilization that might compete with the SMNR that had not yet been announced. We have since obviously reopened those discussions, and here's what I will tell you, Chairman Boner. Optionality in economics terms is the king. Counties, towns, states, nations should never take optionality out of their bailiwick of an analysis and assessment until they can dismiss a specific permutation with clarity. So our pitch right now to the Lincoln County folks on Monday is that there's about 700 megawatts of generating capacity that has been designed for in the transmission and gathering infrastructure. The SMNR applied for and now announced by TerraPower is going to absorb about 340 of those megawatts, leaving 360 megawatts that will be underutilizing existing infrastructure that Wyoming doesn't have to pay for. This project in Kemmerer will utilize about 300 of that available 360. We see this as completely complementary to Southwest Wyoming, and that'll be the messaging that we provide for them on Monday. That's a great question. Thank you, Chairman.
Any further questions, committee? Well, I'll ask a follow-up, and certainly, I mean, there's other, obviously I'm from Commerce County, there's other dynamics that where, you know, it's not necessarily, not every plant potentially might be suited for the modular reactors. It is, after all, experimental technology. So, because you spend a little bit of time talking about the specifics of Dave Johnson, my favorite power plant in the whole set. Well, one of two, I should say. There's also one in Wheatland, but the one that we're most concerned about because it's scheduled to be closed in a few years. But go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Boner. Again, a good question. We were not diminishing the importance of Dave Johnson in any of our discussions over the last 10, 12 weeks. We believe that Dave Johnson singularly as a potential site in Wyoming is among the best. You might remember the situation in Texas with Petra Nova. It was a successful commercial application of carbon capture, but it hit the presses big time last year because, quote unquote, pursuant to how the press covered it, it failed. That didn't fail because of carbon capture technology. It failed because the sequestration site, in this case, an oil field 80 miles away, could not make the recovery of oil from that CO2 injection economic. So one of the primary stakeholders in the project had to say stop. Ergo, the sequestration project on that particular unit of the Petra Nova project had to be shut down. The situation at Dave Johnson is unique, but it's not unique in Wyoming. It is unique in this particular area of the world in that the sequestration site is 6 miles away. The idea about CO2 transport is it's usually transported in its supercritical phase so that it is easy and efficient to move along a pipeline. As you know, friction in a pipeline is a normative condition. The longer you have to transport CO2, the more friction drop. In some cases, if the length of the pipeline that you're using transport is too long, you have to have interstage compression. That becomes ugly because then you have another source for emittance from an interstage compressor, which then requires the EPA and other regulatory functions to be involved. So at Dave Johnson, Unit 4 and Unit 3, even though Unit 3 is committed to the purple haze situation, Unit 4 is ideally suited. It's got the SOx, the NOx, and the bags already installed. Those are EPA equipment requirements. And we can just bolt on a carbon capture unit, and then the sequestration site is less than 6 miles away. So it's perfectly suited. We're really excited about the Dave Johnson plant. PacifiCorp hasn't followed up from their REOI process yet on Dave Johnson. That's because there's been up to 3, there may be more actual participants in wanting to use the Dave Johnson plant for carbon capture. I believe PacifiCorp is excited about it as well. We're enthusiastic that that's a site that implementation can occur in Wyoming and be accomplished inside of the Section 45Q credit timelines that some of the congressional representatives talked about today. So great follow-up question. I think Dave Johnson's got huge potential. At least 2 of their units work for post-combustion. And as Matthew pointed out, the performance guarantee from Mitsubishi on post-combustion should provide the state and the PSC with significant consolation that as long as the project is going to be installed, meaning the private sector is going to pay for it, Wyoming doesn't have any concerns because there's already infrastructure from a legislative position in place through SF 159 and SF 21 to make this a reality in the next 3 to 4 years. Thank you, Chairman.
Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you once again for taking some time to talk to the legislative committee. Wish you the best of luck. And as always, we'll always feel free to reach out if you need anything, except maybe funding. We'll see about that. But as far as obviously you're working in a highly regulated space, and anything along those lines, I think we can have a serious discussion if you ever need anything. So thanks once again.
Thank you, Chairman. And the reason I'm dressed like this, gentleman, is for the first time in 34 years, there's a new well being drilled at the muddy Glenrock Fields. You can see it off of I-25 when you drive south to Denver or Cheyenne. So thank you again, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Keep up the good work. Okay, any further public comment on carbon sequestration? Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, there is no one online.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. Interesting topic. We'll certainly continue to discuss it. And thanks, everybody, for your time, especially our correctional staffers. Really do appreciate it. Like I said, I know you're busy. Appreciate the time for the update and all the work that you've been doing. So that being said, we're going to go on to our next topic with the County Commissioners Association. As they come up, just a brief introduction on my part. We're pretty proud in the northeast part of the state. It's actually the Association of Municipalities that I think takes the lead on a project that does a lot of good for the state and for our region, which is to bring out congressional staffers every August and give them a tour of some of the things we do energy wise. And the county commissioners are here to talk about perhaps expanding upon that idea with their organization. So welcome to the select committee. Glad to see you guys are here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Willix, Converse County Commissioner, but also President of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And Senator Boner is correct. NUI has sponsored a tour in the northeast part of Wyoming for the last several years. And Converse County has been a member of it. And we have learned from that the value of bringing people to Wyoming and as I describe it, showing them multiple use on the ground. And educating them about the issues they're dealing with. Our congressional delegation staffs that are on there are unique in that many of them lived and worked in Wyoming and understand it. But some of these staffers just don't understand Western policies, Western lands. And even if you have somebody come from coal country, coal production in Pennsylvania is entirely different than coal production in Wyoming. And so the NUI tour is something that has been successful. I describe it as hitting bunt singles. You don't bring these people out and hit a home run and change their mind overnight or educate them overnight about how we're doing it, but we continue to try to move the needle. And so when issues come forward that are important to the West, to Wyoming, or just to multiple use, they have context. And I offer one story for you to give you a reason this is so important. The mayor of Douglas for quite a while named was Bruce Jones, and Bruce was very active in this tour. And about 8 years ago, we're meeting in Jackalope Square in downtown Douglas. And a congressional staffer looked to Bruce and he said, "So when did you wash your downtown?" And Bruce goes, "What?" He says, "When did you wash all the coal dust off of downtown Douglas?" It was a genuine question that they believed a coal producing town, and Douglas really is on the edge. That is a better question for Gillette, but still irrelevant. They believed that we were producing this kind of dust as a coal producer. And so that person was able to see clear blue skies as you travel across land. So that's an example of what we're trying to do. You do have a memo in front of you. I don't want to go through it that outlines it, but let me tell you what we have done as an association. We visited with the Ag Committee and we visited with you as well. We're trying to expand this idea and bring congressional staffers to the five corners of Wyoming. I say 5 corners, I think we're dividing into 5 regions. And try to bring this tour and show more of Wyoming than just the northeast corner. And what we have done as an association, we discussed this in September and saw support from it from our 23 counties. Now, not every county was fully represented when we had that discussion, but everybody was positive about the idea that we can, again, move the needle and hit bunt singles, as I call, to try to educate people. We've talked about funding, we've talked about regions, and we're going to follow up a little bit here with some additional information. But we have also been fortunate. We visited with Beth Callaway in the governor's office, and we have some FNRPA funding to help get us going on this first tour. We also know the counties will be kicking in, municipalities will be kicking in, and there may be even the opportunity for private, pretty much the way the NUI tour works now. And I do want to point out that NUI and their leadership has been a partner in this. We are not trying to usurp what they're doing. We want to build on the good things they've done, and they have members on our subcommittee. And so we are working together, not in opposition, to try to expand this idea. And then we have also contracted with the same consultant in DC that helps line up the staffers, so we won't have competing interests as we try to find the people to come out. Utah does a similar tour to this, and we ought to be conscious of how that works. So there's a few moving targets there. It always happens in August, in the August recess. But we just think it's a great opportunity to, again, hit those bunt singles and move the needle. Mr. Chairman, I would take questions now, or I can turn to my colleagues to kind of finish our presentation. We'll take a group set of questions. Does that work?
Yeah, we'll pause here. Any questions for Chairman Brooks? Oh, I have one. As far as just a little bit more information maybe on that process of, I guess, recruiting staffers from the DC area. Is there going to, if we start doing this more often or have a more robust, I guess, tour statewide, is there a chance that, there's only so many staffers to choose from? They might have fewer participation in the NUI tour. Have you had that discussion? I know you said they're not in competition, but is there a risk that you have less participation in the current tour?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So here's my take on it, and we'll visit with our consultant, but you have two dynamics going on there. You have the fact that there's quite a bit of high staff turnover in DC. So you also have a lot of turnover, but also the topics, NUI has really focused on the energy side of things. I mean, it's coal country, oil and gas country. They've done some other, and my colleague here will describe what we kind of visualized for the first tour, but there's other natural resource issues. Agriculture, we were talking carbon capture in agriculture. So we have not brought many agricultural staffers out. That's an area that is maybe fresh. Every committee pretty much has an environmental subset to it. So if you're talking agriculture or energy, military affairs, economic, all of those kind of have a nuance there. So we don't think you will run out of that, because we're targeting different things. And I think in the natural turnover of things, we're talking 8 to 12 in our tour, 15 in the NUI tour. I don't think we'll run out of young people willing to get out of DC to visit. But it's a fair question. And this will be the first time that Wyoming's trying to do this next step. We're going to learn as we go. But I think that would be our thought, is I don't think that will be the challenge. I think the challenge will be narrowing the topics down, because we all want to cover a lot.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Jim, looking at your proposal here, and I was glancing over it, will there be 2 tours, one up in Northeast Wyoming and the other for other parts of Wyoming? I'm unclear on that. I'm just curious. I mean, I'd like to get as many people out, these people out here as we could. And I've had similar things with people from the eastern part of the country on where's the coal dust? When was the last Native American attack on a town? Literally, they just don't understand this part of the world. So is that the concept here? Northeast Wyoming keep doing their thing, and the county commissioners would add another tour in?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yeah, so that's the current idea. And we're not going to start with the NUI, and my colleague from Park County will kind of describe our first region here in a minute, but we don't know what it looks like when we get back to that region yet. We are having that conversation, whether we expand that one, whether that takes place that year. So that's a fair question, but because they're part of the conversation, early on, we will have 2 tours. NUI plans on continuing theirs, and this one would go on in the other regions of the state. So that's the current plan. When it gets to that corner, we're not quite sure what that looks like yet, but we think we have time to figure that out. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to my colleague from Park County to kind of describe what we're thinking about with our first tour.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I can't thank you enough for your support.
Introduce yourself first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Park County Commissioner Lloyd Teal from northwest corner. And I thank you for the support and interest in the congressional tour that we're trying to put together here. I got to say right off, I was somewhat skeptical when I became a part of this subcommittee for the congressional tour, and I was lucky enough to be invited to the NUI tour last year in August. It was very enlightening, and I came out of it no longer skeptical. I mean, there is a definitely a need and a benefit from doing this. It's very difficult to look at an economic value because you never know. There are so many issues back in Washington, and all it takes is having one person to have a little bit of experience on the ground here to maybe think about what they're doing. These people are actually writing policies and making laws back there that affect Wyoming. And so, and of the thing I want to add, the NUI tour that blew me away was I followed around for 3 days and 13 staffers, and not one of them had been to Wyoming. And but they were very interested and they were very naive. They were very well educated in the diverse committees that they sat on back in Washington, but they didn't have a clue what a prairie dog was and how it dug in a hole in the ground. And they were more concerned about that than the bison on the tour. So I just got to say that you do get to these people. They're young, maybe naive isn't the right word, but uneducated in our Western values and that what makes Wyoming, Wyoming. A quick update of what the plan is. You've looked at the initiative in the regions, and the first kickoff one will be in the Bighorn Basin. With that, the committee as well as myself have worked with local legislators up there, Representative Winter, as well as the rest of the representative senators in the Bighorn Basin, as well as the 4 counties, Bighorn, Washakie, and Hot Springs. We'll host the first tour. We currently have a meeting set for December 14th with the 4 counties, along with the Congressional Committee for the WCCA, and we will be discussing, we're really leaning towards a common theme of environment. And with that, environment can be it has an issue in everything from endangered species to energy to 30 by 30. The subject today is climate change. There's environment that affects every part of Wyoming. So with that, then each county will select different subjects or topics that they wish to highlight. It may be agriculture. We're going to lead each county kind of have an independent way of doing it. We're going to look, they're still open for a lot of discussion, but we hope to focus on timber. We have a perfect example of timber management in a very short tour area that you can show what we've done in 5 years as far as select timber sales, thinning and management versus 3 miles up the road, the fires of 88, which are 33 years old, and they're still trying to heal, and how much healthier proper management is done that way. We want to educate these people, not really sell them on any one thing, but just let them make up their own mind. And we've been very fortunate, as Commissioner Willix has announced, that we have contracted with Jennifer Johnson of Bighorn Public Affairs. She has actually been in Washington for quite some time. She moved out there as a staffer herself for Alan Simpson, and then ended up staying. And this is what she knows, the correct people. We want to bring the ones in that are, if you will, on the fence of whether they can. Some people have their minds made up. I've been said of that of me on different things, but at any rate, she will help in selecting the correct staff, legislators for the issues that we're going to be bringing forth, and each county will select whatever they are. So that's kind of where we are as far as moving forward. We'll know more as we get into this. It's going to be a learning process for us, especially. Thank goodness we do have the NUI people on board, especially several on the committee that have done this for now 11, 12 years, I believe. And, we're not in competition with them. That we made clear from the beginning, and we work together, and how it works in the future to have both is still undetermined. But I appreciate your time and support, and if any questions, we can, hopefully one of us can answer.
Any questions for Commissioner Teal? Okay, well, I have one actually. You mentioned, timber as being a particular topic. You mentioned timber being a topic, and any other discussions? I'm just thinking, or potential topic.
What was the topic?
Yeah, any other discussions as far as potential topics for Northwest?
Specific topics?
Yeah, so I imagine endangered species got to be a big deal with the grizzly bear, things like that. Any other information you give us as to what this other tour would look like?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was discussion. We tried to leave it fairly broad, and what we wanted to do was come with something that is of interest, not just in Wyoming, but nationally. One topic that came up was multiple use, and that is a very good topic, and it can be somewhat too narrow. We want to highlight not just our natural resources, but our private industries as well as tourism, what we have locally with tour that have to do with tourism, agriculture. I mean, there's so many different directions you could go with environment. And as Commissioner Willicks mentioned, the environment there's a committee for every Department of Agriculture, the Department of Interior, the Department of Defense, for crying out loud. Everybody has an environmental committee. And and that's what Jennifer, having a consultant on board to know exactly the ones that we need to go to. I can think, for example, of agriculture, one thing that I would hope will be a high topic is going to be glyphosate, the shortage of it and the restrictions used for it. I mean, which is Roundup, and the fact that Bighorn Basin is a huge sugar beet production area with 2 plants. If we don't have glyphosate and Roundup for our agriculture use, the sugar beet farmers this year are going to be hurt detrimental. That they've developed, and I am not going to get into detail, but a Roundup ready seeds that we don't need the labor that they used to have, the migrant labor that came through and weeded and thinned and all of that. You know what that was. We can't just turn key and go back to that. So these issues from the environment to as far as the use of glyphosate or Roundup and its possible cancer causing agents can really harm agriculture, along with the seed program that is especially in Park County up there. We grow a lot of seeds, so we have invasive species. All these issues that they're taking on as far as environment, and next time they're in Washington, they're sitting in committee and they're talking about rules that they need to make to save the environment. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we in Wyoming are, we're somewhat often labeled as, heathen backwoods cowboys that don't care. We are the greatest conservationists there are. We have a great state here. We know what we're doing, and we don't need saved. And just by exposing some of these staffers to what we actually are doing and how we care might be everything in the future.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, I think he alluded to it, December 14th, those 4 counties are getting together. So we don't know those specific ones. He's giving you you heard the problem. There's 47 things and you're going to have 4 days to try to, plus bus time to try to narrow it down. So I do think they've talked a lot about ideas, but I think that's part of their next agenda item is to try to, now what's the specific thing that they'll try to hit in that tour? And the problem is the list is longer than you can cover. So you have to pick. And then what we have discovered on the Nui and others, you can also do a little education on the bus, just on the road, touring through, or you do a drive-by and you just point out, well, look at that prairie dog town, and here's what that means. And all of a sudden you can kind of touch that thing. And we've driven, you know, up, you go up 59, you can pick up a lot of things. You can pick up uranium, you pick up wind, you can pick up cattle and sheep, you can pick up wildlife, you know, raptors. So you can do some of that without ever stopping. So Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn over to Bailey Brennan, our counsel, who's been helping a bunch on this, and for a couple of comments, and then we'll cover whatever questions you've got.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Like President Willick said, my name is Bailey Brennan. I'm the Natural Resource Counsel for the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And I've been working on this initiative behind the scenes for a little over a year now. We are at the association really excited about the prospect of bringing staffers out to the state, taking some time in August to do some looking around of different regions of our state, and yeah, really looking forward to it, and appreciate the support that this committee has provided. And if you do have any follow-up questions after today, please feel free to reach out to me. So thank you.
Any questions from Ms. Brennan? Okay, any questions overall on this concept? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I would just applaud your efforts, say please continue. Anecdotally, when I lived in Douglas, company president came out in going north to one of the operations. He dozed off in the vehicle, woke up, looked around, said, "We there yet?" Said no. And that he dozed off again. And finally, when he woke up the second time, said, "Pull over. I don't like these kind of jokes." What do you mean joke? There is no place in this company that we have an operation this far away from a town. And we weren't there yet. So just seeing the distances that we travel for work, that we travel for enjoyment, I think is something these people need to see. They just don't realize the size and that, and frankly, the smallness of our communities, but how tight those communities are. So I would applaud your efforts and say, please continue, just get them around to the rest of the state too.
Mr. Chairman, more of an ask than a question, but you mentioned August as a time frame. When you're talking about timber and how we manage our forests out here, come August, we'll be choking on the smoke from California, Oregon, and Washington every year, as we do. As a favor, please point out to those staffers that smoke is from California, and those fires emit about 120 million metric tons of CO2. It's not coal that's polluting the air, it's the wildfires, and that normally our sky is a beautiful bright blue like we see today. So that would be my ask for you guys. And like Co-Chairman Burkhart said, I applaud you guys' effort. This is important. So thanks.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Yeah, trees are one of the best carbon captures out there. And we burn them up. The only other thing we didn't touch on, and I want to make, and it was referred to, but we bring both friends and, if you will, foes out. We try to, generally our issues are going to be more about educating the Democratic staffers than the Republican staffers. So the NUI Tour has leaned that way, and I think we would lean that way as well. But as I pointed out, we have Republican friends in states that do it differently. West Virginia coal, Pennsylvania coal, wind, energy, all those are parks. Or even, Yellowstone and Teton are a different kind of park than some of that. So know that we don't bring just people that agree with us. That's important. And we do generally have leaned more towards bringing Democratic staffers than Republican staffers. And when we can get a committee staffer, that's, those are the career people that are there, through administrations. And that's been really valuable as well. So we don't know what the mix will look like exactly, but, we don't want to bring just people that are immediately agree with us, but the other thing that's some of these staffers have never met each other till they get on the plane to come to Wyoming or on the bus traveling back and forth. They work on common issues across the aisle. Some of them even of the same party hadn't met each other. And so you've also helped create a network. And when we go back to DC, we try to touch base with a few of them and just say, hi, what's going on? So, continuing that dialogue, and we're excited about it. It's a lot of work. We don't know what we don't know yet on how this is going to work, but we're pretty excited about it.
So Jim, just a question, coming up on a budget session, the FNRPA account is always one of those ones of, do we need this? Don't we need this? Should we get rid of it? So should we keep the FNRPA account or add to it? I mean, you don't have to answer. I know you
That's
say yes,
rhetorical.
please add to it, but is it working out well?
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely believe it works the way it's designed and is being used well. I think part of the conversation was the balance in there. As we talked about, I'll turn it over to Bailey because she had most of the conversations with Beth. I think we want to continue the stability of that account. You guys understand, this is one more example of how we can use it and make a difference. But yes, the vitality of that account, and particularly, from everything from resource management plans to this tour, this tour is a new use of it, but I think just as valuable as all the other uses. I don't, Bailey, if you had any other conversations with Beth, and of course, Jeremiah used to run that account, our executive director, so he's very familiar with, what that entails.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, yes, the FNRPA account, I think it is a rhetorical question as to whether or not we would like to see it continue or continue to be funded. I think it's important to remember, one, that my position is funded out of the FNRPA account, and I work on this issue as well as a lot of other issues. And counties regularly, and I think with more frequency, will be seeking funding from FNRPA as regulatory changes continue at a federal level and litigation likely increases. So I think there will continue to be a demand for that funding as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm going to take this chance to applaud Bailey of the respect that she has gathered for the work that she has done with her colleagues and with those, if you will, up the food chain is unquestioned. She has done a great job, is well respected in her field, works hard. And so we're getting a lot of bang for our buck right there because we're engaged in all of those conversations. We're not sitting on the outside looking in. It's been said many times, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We are always at the table with comments and I think we get a lot of bang for our buck just being engaged. And then if you use it at the county level. So yeah, I know you knew the answer, but it's this forum and you guys understand it's a valuable account that really is value added for the state, not just for the individual counties that use it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a question for you, Bailey. Are you the one that produces that monthly report that we get on the natural resource issues?
The natural resources update, I am, yes.
Very nice job. Thank you. Keep that report coming. I get a lot of good information out of it that I don't receive from other sources. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments for the county commissioners? All right. Well, once again, thanks for your efforts. Do appreciate it. And yeah, good program. And we'll see what we can do to expand upon it, or we'll see what you do to expand upon it. We'll keep that for NERPA funded. So any public comment on this topic of the congressional tour with our county commissioners? Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have anyone online.
All right. Well, that being said, we'll go ahead, just take maybe a 10-minute break.
Yep.
And come back 5 minutes ahead of schedule at 12:40. Let's do that.
Friday afternoon. Nobody's going to comment.
Talk about water.
Yes. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started again. Next up is certainly a pertinent issue, talking about reusing produced water from oil and gas development. As we know, well, being from the Powder River Basin, at least, we know the scarcity of this resource, and it's important for developing oil and gas, especially in areas that possess a lot of potential. So, yeah, we'll go ahead and get going on this topic. So, welcome to the Select Committee. Go ahead and introduce yourself and see your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tom Kropatch. I'm the Oil and Gas Supervisor for the Oil and Gas Commission. And thought at your pleasure, just to set this topic up, I thought initially I would provide some general statistics on produced water. So we kind of have an idea of what we're talking about in Wyoming. And then maybe a brief discussion on what's currently happening that we know about with produced water in the state of Wyoming, and then maybe some considerations and challenges for produced water reuse, both within the oil and gas industry and maybe outside. So a few minutes on the topic, but first, maybe just a definition of what produced water is. We don't, in our rules at the Oil and Gas Commission, don't define produced water. We have definitions for groundwater and fresh and potable water and other things like that, but not produced water. But generally, it's accepted to be formation water brought to the surface during well completions in oil and gas production. And that's kind of the nationally accepted definition for it. It could mean things in other states, but in Wyoming, we produce approximately somewhere between 1 and 1.5 billion barrels of produced water every year. So that works out to be somewhere around 100 to 120 million barrels of produced water every month. Of note with that, if we split it up a little bit further, about 80% of that is the legacy conventional type oil and gas production or from CBM. About 10% of it is coming from horizontal type production. And then there's another 10% or roughly give or take on all of those from directional wells. So that would be kind of the Jonah Pinedale, Wamsutter, Sweetwater County type regions for directional wells. So the vast majority of produced water in Wyoming is generated from the legacy vertical production. And the reason that's probably important to know is if we really start talking about produced water reuse, where the water is generated and where the water reuse may occur would ideally be located in similar areas, because transportation storage of that water is difficult and expensive. And so that legacy production isn't always where the horizontal activity is, where they're using a lot of produced water. So that's generally the stage of the statistics. What's currently happening with it, where is it used, where is it disposed? By a significant margin, most of the water that's produced is re-injected for enhanced recovery. About half of the water that's produced, about 600 million barrels, is re-injected for enhanced recovery purposes into class 2 wells. Another 10 to 15% of the water is disposed of in class 2 disposal wells. So just injected, not reproduced as part of enhanced recovery. And then some volume of that water is disposed into class 1 commercial disposal wells. I don't have a good number on that. Those are permitted by DEQ, but it's going to be significantly less than what's disposed into class 2 just by sheer volume of the number of wells. There's about 400 or so class 2 disposal wells. There's about 30 class 1 commercial wells. So a fairly insignificant volume compared to everything else. As I said, about 10 to 15% of the total volume of produced water is coal bed methane. Most of that water is either re-injected into the same zones in a class 5 well permitted by DEQ or surface discharged through a WIPD's permit from DEQ. I don't have volumes on those either, but that's almost all of that water is the way that's handled.
So just surface discharge, just maybe give a little bit more context what that, I think it's, injecting it back in is pretty intuitive. Is that like an evaporation pond or something like that? The surface discharge, how is that taken care of, and just a little bit more detail on that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Generally, and this is again permitted through DEQ, so I don't have exact details on what's required in the permits, but they would look at water quality and water quantity for the permit, and you'd have to meet certain permit requirements to be able to discharge. The discharge is usually done into a existing surface water, so usually into an existing stream, eventually put to beneficial use. And I'll touch a little bit more on surface discharge also for the conventional production, but if we look at surface discharge, not only is it done with coal bed methane water, a lot of the water from the legacy type production, especially if you're in the Bighorn Basin. I don't have a volume because I couldn't locate that on the DEQ website for information, but a somewhat significant portion of the produced water, especially in Bighorn Basin and in other basins, legacy, PRB production, for example, is surface discharged also. And again, they look at certain constituents in the water quality to be able to meet permit conditions, and then discharged into a drainage and used for beneficial use. So part of that through the WIPD's program is, it could be used for livestock water, wildlife beneficial use, wildlife water, and any other downstream beneficial use permitted through the state engineer's office. It's available for. So I think that covers everything. So some operators, very minor percentage of the current produced water is being reused by operators within the oil and gas industry. I don't have a good volume on that either. We don't require reporting of water sourcing from operators. So an operator for example, in a well stimulation is required to tell us the volume of water they're using for that stimulation, but they're not required to tell us the source of the water. So it could be fresh water, it could be produced water, it could be some other source of water. Generally, those would be the two options: fresh or produced water from their own operations. So they do tell us in some cases that that they're getting water from one of those scenarios, but they don't tell us which one in that specific treatment. But in conversations with operators, we do know they are reusing produced water for drilling and well completion activities. And for certain operators and in certain operating areas, some operators actually reusing most of the produced water that they generate in a certain location for their additional activities, drilling and completion in those areas. So we do know that there are operators that are reusing almost all of their water if you look at operations in a certain geographic area. Reuse of water within the industry is pretty straightforward. In Wyoming, the water quality of produced water is generally good, fairly low TDS compared to other states. And so simple filtration and treatment with biocides to control bacteria is all that's necessary in many cases for reuse within the industry. Those are generally what's being done with produced water in Wyoming. There's some other minor ones I probably didn't mention, like road spread for dust control, other things like that, but they'd be pretty minor, not impacting a significant volume of water. So quickly, just to discuss considerations or challenges for reuse of produced water that we think of, at least from the commission. And again, it's often thought within two frameworks, within the industry and then for uses outside the oil and gas industry. But generally, a lot of the concerns or challenges would be similar for both of those uses. So you look at things like economics, operational issues, environmental challenges, regulatory issues, and legal issues are kind of the main factors we'd consider in either one of those scenarios. Economic issues are a major factor, especially within the industry. It's costly to transport the water, it's costly to store it. And so if you lack the water pipeline infrastructure, then the costs really start to increase for trucking and other things. And if you don't have a sufficient number of wells being drilled and a sufficient number of rigs running, then it just becomes almost too much on the economic side to handle to store water for operations that are either outside your area or where you're going to store it for a lengthy period of time. And so you can solve that issue either by having that critical mass of activity from an operator or trying to share water between operators. That brings up liability and legal issues and concerns from operators. whether or not an operator they might provide water to would treat it environmentally the same as they might. So are they going to mitigate as many risks as they can from spills or other leaks? Are they going to protect wildlife? Are they going to manage air quality? Are they going to manage residuals if they're doing treatment on it? So many operators are somewhat hesitant to share water between each other, not knowing how the liability and the risk may come back to them later on if the subsequent operator doesn't treat it appropriately. And then regulatory wise, you got to have regulations in place that if you want to, if you're trying to increase the reuse of produced water, your regulations need to be appropriate for that. So allowing, not only allowing the reuse of produced water, but also allowing for the supply chain and construction issues to occur. So for example, we are aware of several, or at least one BLM RMP that has a prohibition on surface pipeline for produced water transport. And especially if you consider like a last mile scenario to, from a reservoir or a storage location to the wellhead, if you can't use surface pipelines, then it becomes very difficult. It's costly to install an actual permanent buried pipeline to an actual well location where you may only need that pipeline for a short time while you're doing a well completion. I think that maybe covers most of what I want to talk about on the reuse inside the industry. Just a couple minor points on outside. It becomes a little more complicated. We would consider reuse like a surface discharge to be an outside the oil field industry use for the water. So there is a large volume of water in Wyoming being reused outside of the industry through those WIPD's discharges. Other potential outside their industry reuse could be injection or infiltration into groundwater, irrigation, land application for irrigation or dust control, or other industrial uses. And in some areas where they're considering supplementing groundwater drawdown or anything from domestic, that's especially a scenario where knowing your water quality is very important. And so for any of those outside the industry uses, fit for purpose on treatment and water quality, it becomes really important consideration. So for those areas, a lot of additional research really is probably necessary depending on the source of what your water quality is on produced water, whatever amendments may have been added to it, how those are affecting your water quality after treatment or other things is probably an area where more research into produced water reuse would be necessary.
And so just real quick there, there's got to be a significant difference between an injection well and something that's, or as we're accustomed to, something that's actually going to put water back into the water table for domestic use for a domestic well. What's the average depth if you had to guess of an injection well that you're permitting?
So that, Mr. Chairman, for class 2 wells that I'm familiar with, they vary pretty widely depending on where you're at within the state. But you could imagine there's most of the time, several thousand feet, 5, 7, 10,000 feet deep. I mean, they range and they vary pretty widely, but there are definitely restrictions on where they can be placed, what the depth is, what formation it can go into, and especially considerations into confining zones above and below to make sure that the water remains in the zone it's injected into.
So a huge difference between a well that's measuring in thousands of feet and one that's measuring in hundreds. And it's
Mr. Chairman, correct. Yeah, your domestic wells, your water source wells are generally pretty shallow compared to the depth of the class 2 wells and also the class 1 wells that they'd be injected into. There is a difference in the class 5, for example, with CBM, because the water quality there essentially is it's the same zone that it's going back into. It's not there's no risk of impairment of the water that's there. So by definition, a class 5 well can't impact the water quality of the zone it's injected into. And so you can inject that water in a shallow zone, but it's because of the quality of that water that you're injecting. The final two things I wanted to mention, for any reuse scenario, I've mentioned legal and liability issues, but that's obviously one of the main concerns and maybe main impediments of reuse of the water. Obviously the operators have a concern about that, making sure that, whoever would reuse it, if they were to provide it to someone else, would treat it appropriately and not create an environmental risk that they might have to incur. But also, if someone's going to use it outside the industry, permitting and scenarios like bonding become important to make sure that, whoever is using that water, if it's being treated, that there's appropriate protection for the surface owners and other nearby owners, and for the state or for the agencies who are permitting that type of work, to make sure that if something were to happen, there's funding available for a cleanup if necessary. So those are always issues to consider. And then finally, there is a report that was put out in 2019 by an organization called the Groundwater Protection Council, and it's very informative on the produced water use and reuse topic. It's actually titled sorry, I had it here in my notes, but Produced Water Report, Regulations, Current Practices, and Research Needs. And we were involved in helping prepare a little bit of that report. It's available on the Groundwater Protection Council website if anybody's interested in reviewing that. But it's a very in-depth look at what could be done with produced water, both in and out of the industry, and also kind of regulations and rules that are in place in most states right now. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes what I was providing. And so if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Oh yeah, what's the website again?
The organization is Groundwater Protection Council. I believe their website is gwpc.org, but it could, if you Google Groundwater Protection Council Produced Water Report, it'll give you a link right to the report itself, I believe. So, and I have a copy downloaded. I can email that out to the committee members to provide that for you.
Yeah, that'd be useful for sure. So, any questions from the Oil and Gas Commission? Okay, well, thanks. Appreciate what you do. Thanks for letting us use your building. It's a nice building. And
You're welcome, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, I think we also have Mr. Gephardt online, according to my information. I don't know if there's been a few changes, Mr. Gephardt, but it looks like you're still able to join us. And first of all, congratulations on your new position. Second of all, welcome to our select committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the congratulations. And I'm kind of wearing two hats today. One would be for the water development, and the other is the soon-to-be hat of the interim state engineer. So thank you for having me.
Okay, yeah, it's good to have you. Feel free to go ahead and proceed with your testimony.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, and I believe as far as wearing my water development hat, I don't know that our agency has any comments as far as reusing oil and gas produced water. We're not, that agency is not regulatory, and we really don't play in that realm. But as far as my upcoming state engineer hat, I've done a little bit of research, and I'm not as knowledgeable as I need to be, but really our only requirement for this is that any produced water that is put to beneficial use would need a permit. If it is not put to a beneficial use, then we do not permit it. That would mean that if it were to flow overland and there was not a beneficial use before it, say, commingled with another water source, we would not permit that water. That water would ultimately be permitted under the appropriations, whatever water source it flows into. So if the producer does choose to put it to beneficial use, then they would have to get a permit through us. The other option that they would have is to contract or have an agreement with a third party user that was going to put it to beneficial use. And in that circumstance, the third party would absolutely have to have a permit for the water, but we would also need an agreement between the producer and the third party. So there would be two components to using water in that manner. But other than that, I don't know of anything that within the state engineer that would interfere with that potential. I'd stand for any questions. I don't have a lot. This is all fairly new to me as well, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, absolutely no worries. Co-Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gebhardt, just hypothetically, if produced water was placed into a stream and allowed to flow down that stream to meet, say, a downstream state's demands for water, would that be considered a beneficial use? Because Wyoming has always considered water just merely flowing in our streams to be beneficial to the state. Now, I know that's a kind of an oddball hypothetical question and you're changing roles here, but any ideas on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I believe that the situation you described is it would not be considered beneficial use until it was withdrawn from the stream that it's flowing in. And then at that point, that permit would be just like any other permit that's on that water body or body of water, excuse me. So at that point, it would not be identified solely as produced water. It would be identified as whatever water is in whatever water source it's in.
Okay, the reason I ask that is with all the current issues with the states west of us, with their water issues and the demands they think they have on the Colorado River and its tributaries, I'm thinking if we have 1 to 1.5 billion barrels of produced water a year and they want more water, we give it to them. Then we don't have to re-inject it. If it's good water, they can have that instead of taking our clean water out of the streams. If all the problem is TDS, maybe we need some legislation.
And
I'm not joking either.
Okay.
No, I understand that, and that that gets beyond the little amount of homework that I've had to do to date, but certainly something that we could have further discussions on.
Well, and there's a reason why so much is injected too, because of the quality of the water is of significant concern. And so I guess that leads into my question, Director, if you have an answer. Does the state engineer do anything in your permitting process to check on the quality of the water as being reintroduced, in this case, to a live body of water?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that purview would fall under the discharge permit through probably DEQ and potentially EPA.
So that's a separate permitting process for DEQ.
Separate from any process for the state engineers. That's correct. We do not permit water quality.
Okay, so any further questions, committee? All right. Well, thank you, Director Gebhardt. Good luck getting your feet underneath you, and looking forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
All right. And so, all right, looks like we're through our stage to see comment. We'll open up to public comment on this topic. Mr. Robitaille.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Robitaille, CEO, Encore Green Environmental. To my knowledge, we are the only company in the United States and perhaps the world that has permits to take produced water, treat it, and land apply it. Now, I want to be very clear. There's the differential, what we're talking about. What has been spoken about quite a bit here lately today is injecting into a live stream. That is a DEQ permit. It's called a WIPSES, WPDES, Wyoming Permit or Wyoming Pollution Discharge Elimination System. That is a permitting system that is controlled by the EPA. That is entirely different than what my company does. What my company does, we have a permit through the DEQ to land apply this water. Now, in land applying, we are not allowed to puddle water. We are not allowed to run off water, nor are we allowed to impact any groundwater. And so what we do, we take the water as close to the wellhead as possible. And right now, I can tell you I'm in discussions with 3 different companies in Wyoming alone. Unfortunately, that's as far as I can get due to some NDAs, but we are in discussion about moving some projects forward beginning next spring. And our project is really designed to help improve the native grass and the native range. We will do this through the use of a certified agronomist. We use probes that go in the ground. They're 4-foot probes that go in the ground, and they measure every 5 inches every 15 minutes. They measure temperature of that soil. They measure the electroconductivity of that soil, SAR, and they measure the moisture content of that soil. So I can tell you where that water in that soil is in the profile at any time. This is all uploaded onto a public website. Anyone can look at it. Anybody can look at it and see what's going on. We do that to ensure that we don't have issues. We don't have problems. We use our agronomists to ensure that we don't impact the soil in a negative way. We're an agricultural company. We're trying to help the agricultural world boost their production on native grasses. We can improve habitat for wildlife if the landowner so chooses to do. We can grow hay if that's what they choose to do. We can do a number of things. I am concerned as I look out today, and it's 50 degrees at the beginning of December. The last measurable moisture I can remember was in October. I sat and listened to our current state engineer, past state engineer, whatever he is. And he mentioned, Representative Burkhart, you're concerned about the downstream users. He mentioned that the soil gets so dry that the moisture that we get sinks into the soil and there is no runoff. If there is no runoff, there is no reservoirs getting full. That's an issue. Another issue I see is these companies that are producing these wells, they have to get rid of their water somehow. They truck it, they pipe it, or they re-inject it, whatever the case may be. Trucking is expensive. When oil drops to $50 a barrel or less, trucking gets very expensive. Our mindset is to try to beat those prices across the board unilaterally. It doesn't matter what the price of oil does. If we can beat those prices, then we can help the oil company produce that well even longer. We get those taxes, we get those benefits, we get those jobs, we get all of this for a much longer period of time. We don't want those wells to go uneconomic prematurely, is the point. Oftentimes when we talk about water, we talk about lifting cost. If I'm going to drill a 300-foot well, I got to pay to lift that stuff out. With our process, the oil company has already lifted that water for you. Our model is we charge the company to treat the water and we give it to the landowner. We give it to them in 6-inch increments over the year. I don't want to put more than 6 inches on over a year because our typical precipitation in this area is 12 to 14 inches. It would be like having a really wet year every year, which would benefit everybody. Representative Burkhart mentioned perhaps we should just take this water and put it all in streams. DEQ has very strict standards about what can go in a stream depending on that stream. They have different classifications. Some are class 1, some are down to class 4. But the ability to do that becomes extremely difficult. And so our solution is if we can take that water that's already being produced, put it to another use where perhaps we don't have to drill so many groundwater wells, then perhaps we're building that ground table back. We're allowing for better runoff when the time comes, and the problem solves itself through a different type of use. One other quick thing, you were discussing carbon capture earlier today. Rangelands, particular Wyoming rangelands, the West rangelands, second to the ocean, are the biggest carbon sink there is. The best way to improve soil is to add water. If we improve soil, we improve surface and subsurface vegetation. Through the simple process of photosynthesis, we are removing carbon from the air and storing it in the root as a carbohydrate. We believe that by adding additional water, the benefits are just beyond anything that we could potentially think of. But in doing so, we think that we check a lot of different boxes, and we think that we can help not only our agriculture partners, our industry partners, but also our friends that are very concerned about climate crisis and so on. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so everyone understands, I am not proposing we put produced water into streams. I would fight against that. That was just hypothetical, that if Western states want Wyoming water, maybe we give them produced water in some manner first and keep the good water for ourselves. But I'm not advocating just dumping it into streams. So, Mr. Robitaille, your process, how do you address some of the wells in Wyoming have other things in them than just total dissolved solids? They may have a small amount of hydrocarbon.
Mm-hmm.
A number of them have methanol that's been injected to keep the wells from freezing. Some of them have glycol in them. How do you address all of those issues before you put it on the ground?
Mr. Chairman, our process is a two-step process, and really we believe it's fail-safe. So our first initial, before we do anything, is we test the produced water, and we send it off to a certified lab, and we find out what's in it. One of the things that we found that's very common in Wyoming is boron. We weren't even aware of that. I wasn't aware of that prior to testing some of the water. But there's a number of things in produced water, and it's groundwater. It's been there for thousands of years. And so once we get that report back, we have a list of constituents in our DEQ permit and levels that we have to meet. And then we run that water through our mechanical vapor recompression machine, which is, I describe it basically like a big still. It essentially turns the water into a steam, and the nice clean water is recondensed, and the rest of the dirty brine water is then put into a discharge. And then once we have that second batch already through the machine, we test it again, and we make sure that water not only meets the DEQ standards, but it also meets the soil. If there's something in that soil which may cause an issue, something that we need to amend the soil for to prevent issues or what have you, then we take those steps at that point. But we do not put any water on before testing it at least twice. And we have to have approval from the DEQ as part of our permit condition to land apply any water at all.
So we were, distinguishing yourself between putting the water back into the stream and putting it in surface use. Are there different DEQ standards for those separate, activities? And if so, what can you describe the differences?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So there's the WIPDES program is really designed for livestock and water use. And so there are certain standards, and I'm afraid I don't have them in front of me, but you can look at the, say, we'll just use TDS as one. That TDS is fairly high. My permit follows the National Drinking Water Standards, which all of my limits and all of my constituents are much lower than anything in the WIPD's permit.
And it sounds like there's already a current process in place for you to do your business, and is that correct? I mean, you got all your permits, you're just waiting for the, your private agreements. Obviously, this is ultimately in the private sector. You're just kind of waiting for everything to fall into place. Is that a correct assessment for as far as maybe a status update from where you're at?
Mr. Chairman, that's mostly correct. Supervisor Kropatch mentioned the word liability. There are companies that are very concerned about liability, and rightfully so. They're the deep pockets. They're the ones that everybody will go to should something go wrong, whether it's their fault or not. We are in discussions offering to buy liability insurance, offering to sign whatever papers their lawyers come up with regarding liability, because we trust our program so well. But it's still a rough road. It's an interesting concept, and one that we knew we would run into. As you know, Mr. Chairman, we spoke about it earlier this year at Select Water. But it is a hurdle, and we're doing our very best, as you all suggested, to get through it on our own.
Well, I wish you the best of luck, and obviously, from a landowner's perspective, it's always, the risk that is always there, and it's doesn't matter how dry it gets, we're still, that's going to be a hurdle too. And as you know, as I've expressed publicly before. So, but that being said, of course, I do recognize what you're trying to do. It'd be beneficial to everybody if it works, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for Mr. Robert?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to make any sense, but the liability thing is interesting, because I can definitely see the problem of possibly having a Wild Earth Guardians lawsuit, to put these guys out of business, deep pockets, like you mentioned. What about if you're already permitted through the state? Wouldn't that come with some sort of, with the state being able to stamp their approval on your processes that they're safe and the water's good? Shouldn't that be enough? Or what could we do at the state level to make it enough, is my question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, it's an interesting question. And I find that really, I believe the rub is from lawyers in tall buildings in big cities. I think eventually, we'll get there. But for now, it's difficult. It's a brand new concept, and it's something that's hard to get your head around, especially if you've been sued before. I get a little gun shy about that, and rightfully so. But in all honesty, we're trying to help all the parties. We're trying to keep Wyoming's wells open. Too many of these wells have been plugged and abandoned early, and I don't like to see that. That's tax revenue, that's jobs. Those are things that really bother me. This is my state, and I don't want that to happen. So how do I help them? I lower their cost, and in lowering their cost, they see the ghost of liability, and that's That's something that we're going to have to work through. But it also helps a lot of these publicly traded companies with their ESG programs. Because now suddenly we're taking a waste and turning it into a resource. And their shareholders are excited about that. So there may be a trade-off there. I'm not sure. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, well, appreciate your testimony. And you said, I guess it all comes down to risk versus reward. And as you already mentioned, there's already significant reward out there with the reduced cost, but obviously there's maybe more coming down the pipe. We'll see what happens. So
we'll keep working on it, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Okay, any further questions, Mr. Robitaille? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, any further public comment?
Want to drill Mr.
Okay. Mr. Wilkes, welcome back. Commissioner Wilkes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Wilkes, Commerce County Commissioner, in the hat I'm wearing right now. I seldom like to come to these committees with a problem without a solution, but as you talk about reusing water, let me give you a real life one that I'm struggling to find a good answer to. We produce a lot of water in the oil and gas industry north of Douglas, and we got a lot of county dirt roads. And we're not allowed because, and maybe allowed is right, but we haven't found an efficient way to be able to use that water for dust control. Instead, we haul it from here along this dirty, dusty road over to here, instead of maybe doing, and then we buy it from here or get it from a different well. And I think it's a combination of the state engineer, the DEQ, and the Oil and Gas Commission. And I'm not sure all those interrelationships. We haven't been able to find a way to use, and I'm going to use the term loosely, little bit dirty water. You know, it's been the discussion. There's a range of water that comes out. And we haven't found an efficient, economical way to do dust control, which I think we would all agree is a good thing, with that water, instead of transporting it over our roads, using it. And I don't know if it's legislative, I don't know if it's regulation, and I don't know if it's even possible because maybe the little dirty is too much. But sometimes if it's just TDS, is that we're putting it on dirt to control. So it's just one of those issues that if you're looking at ideas on how we can do that, reusing it for dust control on dirt roads, well, I hate to call them dirt. It's the chairman may disagree. I'll call them gravel roads. There's a distinction, not a difference at times. It's just a nuance. It's always annoyed me that we haul this water over here and create dust with it and then haul water back to do dust control. And I apologize for coming with a problem with no path for a solution. Maybe people smarter than me can figure it out, but it's just one that's always bothered me.
Well,
with that, Mr. Chairman.
Wilkes, I'm not sure if there's any obstacles. I can tell you from the, we've talked about lawyers and high-rise buildings, we've talked about, Greenpeace or whoever, but there's also the rancher who owns the property who doesn't want it contaminated. And that's just speaking from personal experience, when a trucker doesn't follow the rules and just sprays the produced water out the back side of his truck onto your property, that is a huge deal. And it's against, near as I can tell, it's against the law, and there's reasons why it's against the law. And so I can't emphasize enough that this water is in fact a significant environmental hazard. It's a hazard to the rancher whose property you may be on. That'd be a very dicey subject to bring up, I'd say, in Commerce County Lease Commissioner, if you don't take into account the landowner whose land the county road goes through. But like I said, I mean, there's technology will progress. If there's an opportunity to actually clean the water to the point where it doesn't pose a liability, and that works, and yeah, the regulatory framework is there. That's not the problem.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you and I both know that we know exactly what we're talking about. We talk about roads crossing, they're doing. And I wasn't implying we should do it the wrong way. It just seems like to me that we're sometimes not doing it the best way we could. And I just don't understand all those answers. You're right. It's more complicated than I made it, and I appreciate that. But yeah, you are crossing private lands and the road, but dust control is a big deal. And if you could do that right, that would help also the adjoining landowners, because that's one of the concerns they have. So again, I come with a problem, not a solution, and I apologize for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, please stay there. Just a question for clarification and maybe help define the problem a little bit better. The water you want to use, is it the The producing company says we won't let you put it on the road. The state says you can't put it on the road. The landowner is a different matter. That's a business issue between you and the landowner. Who says you cannot put it on the road? Let's start there.
And Mr. Chairman, and Representative Burger, I didn't come fully prepared for this topic, so I apologize. But as I understand the way it has been reached out, it's generally, I think, a DEQ Act question because they're the water quality component of it. I think you heard from the Oil and Gas Commission, they don't really regulate that portion of it, but they're all integrated at some level. And so it is, and I think Senator Boner is correct, that if you have perfect water, you maybe can, but that's the problem is we don't have perfect water yet. So what is the acceptable? Some of it's highly, a lot of salts is in there. That's a different issue, but it's a little salts. And then does it aggregate over time? And that becomes an issue. So it's, I have a simple problem that has a complicated solution, and I fully recognize that. But it was the topic of the day, and so I decided to come home forward for a minute.
And Mr. Chairman, so because I've had to deal with this exact issue myself. And that's why I asked if you could get, let's say, how would I describe this? Inexpensive, but good quality water. Would that help solve your problem?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, because like Mr. Robitaille pointed out, trucking becomes a big issue for the water to a lot of these locations. And also if we're redoing the road and incorporating a dust suppressant, whether it be calcium chloride or magnesium, you also want some water when you apply that. And we've had good luck with companies working with us, but part of the problem, and just the nature of Wyoming, the distance from where the water is to where the road is not always conducive. So you either sacrifice the amount of water you want to haul, and in dry summers, you can't haul enough to work the road over the way you want to. So you're always making compromises. So yes, inexpensive water close to the location is what everybody wants. And then there is a demand for that for reuse within the industry as well. If it's clean enough to be used, if we get to that standard, then there's more competing interests. The rancher in the back of my head says you ought to be able to put some pond water on there that's a little brown and be fine. And it's never that simple. But that's kind of my thought process. It's annoying to watch all that water haul by and cause dust instead of settle dust. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I said, I come with a problem, not a solution. I admit that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further public comment on this issue? Mr. Gagnon, you're sitting there very quietly for now.
He wasn't even.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockbrokers Association. And I didn't come here for the purpose of testifying, but I did come because of our strong interest in this issue, and particularly in the program that Mr. Robitaille presented to you. We've been involved with his company from the beginning in developing the program. We helped work through the process with DEQ, and we've seen a lot of interest and enthusiasm being shown by our landowners for the possibility of enhancing their forage production through the use of this water. And of course, with the drought of this past year, when I had lands of my own that finally greened up in October when they got some moisture, no greening up in the spring, had some of that water been available, I'd certainly been very interested in it. But I just want to put that ag perspective to this, that done the right way, we think it has a lot of potential, particularly as our water supplies keep shrinking in the state. And we've studied and followed the technology that Mr. Robitaille's company is using for that. We have a high level of comfort that the water is being properly treated, and that there are not risks to the land or to the landowner from the application of that water. So we encourage that process to move forward. At this point, we're not asking for anything from the committee or from the legislature other than want you to be aware of our support. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for the stockbrokers? Well, could you describe that? You say you have some ranchers who are interested. Obviously, it seems to me you have to have ranchers who are interested, but are also close to some sort of oil and gas.
Pardon me, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, Seems to me you have to have not just somebody who's interested, but somebody who's interested who is close enough to oil and gas well to actually take advantage of the program. And so could you maybe just describe in general terms, don't need too many specifics, the type of producer that is interested, they have experience with oil and gas development or not in
Well,
particular?
clearly it's got to work. It's got to be relatively close. There's been some initial work done, for example, on a property in eastern Laramie County that had the water was produced there. One of the suggestions that we have made to some of our landowners is that as they're negotiating oil and gas leases or surface use agreements, that they consider building that into those agreements, that the ability to have the access to that water through companies that can properly process and clean it. So, and I think that could be a way to overcome some of that. But clearly, we're not going to be building pipelines and transporting this water for miles across the state. I don't think the economic viability exists there today, although if we continue in drought situations, who knows what might become viable in the future.
And so you mentioned one in eastern Laramie County. Did that landowner have any previous experience with oil and gas development, or is that kind of new to them?
I'm not aware that they did. Mr. Robitaille could better address that particular scenario. I've been involved in it secondarily to show our support, but it's something that they were able to negotiate with the landowner and with the company that was producing that particular water.
And it just seems to me that you have, more opportunities to talk to more, landowners in areas that have already had a lot of production. I just wonder if you had tried that and what the reception was, if you have.
Mr. Chairman, I think at this point, and again, I'm sort of off to the side of this. I'm not involved in the negotiations. We've been helping to deliver the message and we've been getting good feedback from landowners. I think the issue in some areas that I'm aware of is big in getting the landowner and the energy company that's producing the water sort of on the same page. And that's a lot of what I know Mr. Robitaille's effort has been. But I've talked with a few landowners of interested that have talked with the energy companies that are producing on or near their property, and they haven't found that enthusiasm move forward yet at this point in time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any further discussion on this important topic? Bruce Water. Anybody online?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right, go ahead and move on. We do have one more person testify on our last topic for hunting and fishing on wreckages from the Fish and Wildlife Service. I believe that individual is, well, they're definitely online because nobody else is here. And so we'll wait testimony from the Fish and Wildlife Service if they're still on Zoom. Looks like Mr. Abbott.
John? Mr. Robitaille?
Hey, Mr. Abbott, the floor is yours. Oh, it looks like you're still on mute, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I was asked to come here my understanding was to answer some questions that you or others might have. And so I'm happy to do that. What I can do is I'm happy to review the hunting and fishing program for federal lands, if that would be helpful, and summarize where we are in Wyoming. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer specific questions.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Excuse me, Mr. Abbott, I'd say yes, if you'd fill us in on where we are on hunting, fishing, and those issues from the Fish and Wildlife Services standpoint, that'd be great. We get these questions from our constituents all the time, and we don't always have a good answer for them.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll just review the secretarial order and executive order that led to the directive to provide more hunting and fishing opportunities on federal lands, and then provide a summary of where we are in Wyoming. I'll start with the fact that in March of 2017, Then Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke under the Trump administration issued Secretarial Order 3347, and that was on the conservation, stewardship, and outdoor recreation. And that order, among other things, instructed the department to identify specific actions regarding recreational hunting and fishing on public lands. Well, that order expired in 30 days, and it was followed up by Secretarial Order 3356 in September of 2017. And that included a directive for Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, essentially to identify departmental lands and waters where access to hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting and other forms of recreation might be possible, and then to evaluate those opportunities and implement them accordingly. So in terms of a process, I'll be brief here and then get into Wyoming, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service annually publishes our station-specific hunting and sport fishing regulations as an update to the Title 50 of the Code of Federal Regulations. We review, a review and formal approval of the station-specific regulations are required before the service can open or expand hunting and fishing opportunities on other National Wildlife Refuge lands. The regulations basically ensure compatible opportunities for hunters and fishermen. And the annual regulations open and expand hunting and sport fishing opportunities, and they revise existing regulations. Now, before a National Wildlife Refuge or a National Fish Hatchery is added to this list of stations opening or expanding hunting and fishing opportunities, the service develops a hunting and fishing plan for that particular station. And we incorporate the proposed hunting and fishing activities into the station's comprehensive conservation plan, or CCP, and or other step-down management plans per guidance in Fish and Wildlife Service manuals. And then the service prepares a comprehensive conservation plan and a step-down plan in compliance with National Environmental Policy Act, CEQ guidance, NEPA regulations, and Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. So in the year 2021, 2022, station-specific hunting and sport fishing rule in interior regions 5 and 7, refuges proposed opening and or expanding opportunities on more than 996,000 acres. Openings and expansions by state and station include Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. So in 2021 and 2022, the National Elk Refuge was open for pronghorn and white-tailed deer hunting. Now, prior to that, that's the latest one that we've opened up. Prior to that, in 2019 and 2020, really in response to Secretary Zinke's order, Fish and Wildlife Service conducted a national review of our National Wildlife Refuge system lands. We looked at species, habitats, and opportunities for fishing and hunting. Then we asked if we could open certain areas, and we looked at associated coverage within the comprehensive conservation plans for each of those refuges. We looked at compatibility with refuge purposes, and most such areas usually are not covered by comprehensive conservation plans because these plans tend to be very general. So they don't address the types of hunting opportunities, when hunting could occur, where, and what approaches and that type of thing. Once we do that, we then, so we reviewed all of the National Wildlife Refuges across the nation, and we then did a compatibility analysis and the NEPA process. In all of these endeavors, we work very closely with the state game and fish agencies. That's fundamentally important here, is the authorities to implement hunting and fishing regulations. Once an area has been identified as an opportunity or a possibility, it then goes through the rulemaking process and the public comment process. So in terms of Wyoming, to date, we've worked with the state, and we have been able to open up every refuge that has been requested with an opportunity to be open for hunting and fishing, except for Mortenson Lake National Wildlife Refuge. And that was the only one that the state had asked us to evaluate that we were not able to open up. And the state, we worked with Director Talbot pretty closely on that at the time. And there was a pretty clear understanding that because of the status of the highly endangered Wyoming toad, some of the citrus fungus issues and other sensitivities, that the timing was not ripe at that particular time. That being said, we did acknowledge that it's quite possible and feasible that if the status of the Wyoming toad were to change to a threatened status instead of endangered, then we would reevaluate that. Some of the other opportunities that were opened up over the last couple of years within Wyoming include Bamforth Lake National Wildlife Refuge. That's open to elk, mule deer, pronghorn, and several other small game species. Hutton Lake is open as well, and several others, including Pathfinder. So I think we added fishing to Seatskiddy as well as Cokeville Meadows in 2019 and 2020. And I guess at the end of the day, the important point is that we've responded to, the Fish and Wildlife Service responded to the requests of Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And in every case, we were able to open up hunting and fishing opportunities with the exception, like I said, of Mortenson Lake National Wildlife Refuge, which they're part of that recovery team. And we're well aware of the issues there, and we're satisfied with that analysis. So all that being said, I'll wrap up my comments here by saying that, this is, I guess I would say it's a dynamic process in which the hunting and fishing community, hunting and fishing public are always welcome to, if they have a question about opportunities on a national wildlife refuge in Wyoming that they're not happy with or not satisfied with, or they would like to see more opportunities, more accessibility, then there's an opportunity for them to contact the station manager, the National Wildlife Refuge manager, and to ask the question, what would it take, or what could we do, or why don't we have that opportunity? And at that point, the refuge manager would follow up accordingly. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abbott. Any questions, committee?
Oh, I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Abbott, thank you very much. I appreciate you waiting till the end of the day. It's late on a Friday. I appreciate your time and your comments. And like I said, it gives us information we can give to our constituents who ask these questions.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, once again, thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Abbott. Any other public comment online? Okay, well, it is 4:04 on a Friday afternoon. I guess that means something to some people, but any further questions, comments for the committee? Any further discussion points? Anything you want to bring up before we head out here?
I guess, Mr. Chairman, I guess you and I will discuss whether that one bill is a Senate or House bill and where we would like it to go.
Yeah, after
yeah.
consulting with some of our colleagues.
Yeah. Okay.
That's correct. So look forward to that one in February. So any further questions, comments, snide remarks? Senator Anderson is not here, so we don't do that. So, okay, looks like we're adjourned.
All right.